Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to this first press briefing from the European Union. Let me start by introducing our two speakers today. They are Maria Samuelsson, who is the head of the Danish delegation and Denmark's chief negotiator to the UNFCCC. Denmark currently holds the presidency of the Council of the EU, and Jake Worksman, who is the head of the EU delegation. I'll start by handing over to Maria and Jake now to set the scene and give you an update on the first couple of days of negotiations from the EU's perspective, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. So, Maria, if you'd like to kick us off.
Thank you. Is it working? Oh yeah, now it's working. Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll start by saying a bit about the EU priorities for this COP, and then I'll leave it to Jake to give a bit of a state of play in the negotiations. So first of all, I think it's very important to stress that for the EU, the Paris Agreement is really working. It is showing that multilateralism is delivering results, but it's not going fast enough. And I think recent scientific reports and also the NDC synthesis report show this very clearly. So for the EU, a key priority is ensuring a negotiated response plan for enhancing the collective level of action and ambition and implementation of the NDCs. It's clear that we need to do more to follow up on the global stocktake from 2 years ago, and we also need to do what we can to use the spaces we have available, including through the action agenda. We also need to finalize the work on adaptation indicators. The indicators are key for countries to prepare themselves and respond to climate impacts and inform our collective progress. So that's also a key deliverable for the EU. Thirdly, we need to deliver on the climate finance decision we made last year. In the EU in 2024 provided 31.8 billion euros of public climate finance and mobilized 11 billion euros of private finance to support climate action in developing countries. We are the largest provider, and we want to make sure that we do our part to mobilize the at least $300 billion a year by 2035, and also enhance action to scale up finance from all sources to the at least 1.3 trillion that we also agreed last year. We also need to make sure that we advance on the Just Transition Work Program and make sure that it's a space for sharing experiences and mutual learning on how to implement just transition domestically. A key priority for the EU is also making progress on 21C, on the making finance flows consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. We've had a process for the past 2 years, and we want to make sure that that mandate is extended so that we can continue this work going forward. And the last point I want to highlight, of course, there are many priorities, but I also want to highlight the agreement on the new Gender Action Plan, where we think advancing gender equality is not only a question of justice, it's also a key enabler for effective climate action. So that's something that we will be prioritizing in the negotiations as well. I'll hand over to Jake.
Thanks, Maria. And let me start by saying what a pleasure it's been working with the Danish presidency and all the experience that you bring to these negotiations. We've had conversations with the press prior to and in preparation for this COP, sort of drawing out aspects of its uniqueness. There's no question this is an incredibly important COP for the Paris Agreement, primarily because it is the COP by which the parties needed to have delivered their nationally determined contributions, their mitigation targets that will give the world the confidence that we are in fact on a pathway to avoiding dangerous climate change. But what was challenging about this COP is that there was no particular agenda item provided by the mandated agendas for this meeting in order to capture that outcome, to recognize the progress that's being made, and to indicate how we would address what many expected would be a significant gap between those NDCs as aggregated and the pathway that we need to be on in order to avoid a 1.5 degrees of global average temperature rise. So that was a challenge at the outset of the COP. What's developed since then, of course, as all of you have known, is that some agenda item proposals came from parties, and in particular, the agenda item proposal from AOSIS, which proposed that we would discuss and take a decision on the NDC synthesis report and to plot a way forward, as well as an agenda item proposal from the EU, which proposed that we discuss another very important synthesis report that was being presented at this meeting, the report on the biennial transparency reports, or the BTRs, which indicate the progress that's being made by parties in the pre-2030 period. In other words, their implementation of their existing NDCs. And together we thought these would make a very important snapshot of an indication of the pathways that we're on now, but also the pathways that are planned for the future. Those two agenda items were presented, as many of you know, by parties in time to be included on the supplementary agenda. And then they became part of a discussion as to how we got an agenda adopted. You'll know that we reached a deal on this, and the Brazilian presidency decided to take what they saw as the foremost politically essential discussions that would have to be taken place at this COP, represented by 4 agenda items, those two, plus 2 proposals from the like-minded developing countries group, one on Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement, which deals with the climate finance to be provided by developed countries under the Paris Agreement, and another on what we shorthand refer to as the issues around trade and climate. So in order to get the agenda adopted, the Brazilian presidency decided to create a space. At the end, it was landed as a space for presidential consultations to see whether we could address not those agenda items as framed, but issues related to those agenda items in a way that could describe a path forward, that could provide the basis for some kind of consensus to help us to move forward and to generate a multilaterally negotiated, agreed outcome for this COP that wasn't originally anticipated, and that might be able to send the kinds of signals that we believe are necessary to, yes, show that Paris is working, but Paris needs to be accelerated, implementation of Paris needs to be accelerated. We've got to deepen international cooperation to deliver the kinds of outcomes that we know are necessary. So, since Monday, we've been meeting in that format of presidency consultations. They've been open to observers. I don't know how much you've been able to follow them yourselves, but some progress is being made. It's been challenging, obviously, with those 4 items and issues related to them on the table. There are some very strong differences of views amongst parties. I would have to say very clearly that these are not north-south divisions. There are many, for example, developing countries that are very concerned to see that there is a response to the ambition gap. That was tabled by AOSIS, hasn't been supported by many developing countries. And the EU, as a developed country, is prepared to talk about issues related to all 4 of these agenda item proposals. And as a result of that, the fact that it isn't purely a north-south divide, I do think that the conversations that we've been having over the past couple of days are beginning to build some bridges. We are definitely not there yet. We're only 2 days into the COP, but there will be a few more hours spent in that format today. And then, as I understand it, at least the last time I looked at the agenda, there will be an opportunity in plenary for the Brazilian presidency to give its views on what will happen next. So this is a what will happen next question that has 3 elements to it. Right? One is what will happen next on the substance. The next is what will happen next on the process. And the third is, how will any progress that we make be captured in the form of a decision? And here there is still an open question as to how we take any progress on issues related to those 4 agenda items, convert them into decision text, which is something that the Brazilian presidency has promised they will try to achieve. Obviously, it's the parties that have to agree those decisions, but Brazilians have indicated they're going to try to create all the conditions necessary to deliver that. They will then have to find those draft decisions a place on the agenda for them to be adopted. Or we may have to revert to a conversation about some kind of cover decision that might enable them to be adopted. That as yet has not been decided. Finally, we'll have to deal with, as we do at every COP, how do we produce a balanced package of outcomes for this COP, right? Those 4 issue areas are 4 that everyone would acknowledge are very important to making progress forward, but they don't include anything on adaptation. They don't include anything on loss and damage or capacity building or any of the other issues that tend to make up a balanced package of the COP. So there is that aspect as well that we would have to manage. For example, if we went the cover decision route, how could that cover decision reflect progress made in the negotiations on the global goal on adaptation to make sure that we achieve balance there, et cetera, et cetera. So we're relatively early days. Many of you guys are very experienced COP watchers, so you know that just reaching the middle of the first week is not where you can have an absolutely clear sense of where the landing grounds might lie. Some of the issues that are being raised, even at the technical level, will probably need ministerial engagement in order to resolve them, and ministers don't begin to arrive until next week. And so it's difficult to say where all of this will end up by the end of the COP. But I think it's fair to say in the way in which the Brazilians are managing the process and all the sensitivities of the many diverse parties with regard to the substance is looking promising in terms of finding a way forward. So Alistair, maybe I'll stop there. We never know, because you come from many different countries, you have many different interests. When you come to meetings like this, it's probably better for you to ask specific questions to make sure that we can, as much as possible at this stage in the process, provide you with some responses, at least from an EU perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake and Maria. I think we can open the floor to questions then. I just ask you to say your name and the organisation you're coming from, and wait for the mic to come round. So maybe let's start here on the second row on the left-hand side. There's 2 questions here, and maybe we can take 2 or 3 and then do another round.
Hi, thank you. John Ainger from Bloomberg News. Can you explain a little bit what, in terms of capturing negotiations in some sort of cover decision or otherwise, what the EU's expectations are on the response to the NDC synthesis report, and also on fossil fuels? Obviously, Lula came forward.
said that the EU was open to discussing all 4 issues, and I'm wondering just for you, what are you comfortable with on finance and the trade measures? Like, where do you see that actually being, that actually going on those 2 issues? Thank you.
It'd be really hard to understand. Yeah.
Can we get the mic turned up a little bit because it's very difficult to hear up here?
It's actually really hard to hear you guys. I mean, yeah, I don't know whether there's any. Are we the first press? Are we the first having a press conference at this meeting? Maybe we are. I don't know.
Did you catch the?
I think I caught the gist of the first 2 questions.
Okay.
So with regard to the EU's expectations on discussions about the response to the NDC synthesis report and what that represents in terms of how far we are on that pathway to net zero, we have to be very careful, it's clear, as signaled by our partners, that this response can't suggest any change to the Paris Agreement architecture, which we all know operates on a 5-year ambition cycle and depends upon each country, each party, determining nationally what they think is the highest level of ambition that they can deliver through those NDCs. We see no reason to press against those boundaries. I mean, those are clear boundaries. So what can we do instead? Well, we think it's very important that this process send a political signal of acknowledgement that while progress has been made, there is still a significant ambition gap that needs to be addressed. How can we address that? Continued conversations about how we can now work together to accelerate the implementation of the NDCs that we have received and to encourage parties that have not yet submitted their NDCs to do so. We also see that when you look at these NDCs that have been submitted so far, there's actually a significant difference from the first round, which is they have come accompanied by, for many countries and many parties, lists of policies and measures that they intend to put in place in order to implement those NDCs. And for us, that is a very rich opportunity to figure out ways in which we can cooperate more deeply to accelerate implementation. So, for example, many have acknowledged that the transition away from fossil fuels that is set out in the GST, and particularly in paragraph 28, it was important to highlight as one of their objectives in their NDCs. And that contains language about accelerating the growth of renewable energy, of energy efficiency. There are many indications about the importance of grids and storage to that challenge. There's a lot of interest in new technologies like green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. These now become offers of partnership across different countries where they can work together to see how they can build on those. Our experience in the EU, and we still feel that we have a few years more experience than many other partners in actually implementing targets of the kind that now more and more countries are signing up to, is that the more you engage in implementation, the more it reveals opportunities to become more ambitious with that implementation. And the reports that are coming out, maybe you've seen some of the embargoed ones from the IEA, confirm this. The amount of savings that countries can achieve through making investments in renewables and energy efficiency is really powerful. But you only begin to see that as you begin to implement them. It's fine for the IEA to say it in theory, but you do begin to experience it once it becomes practice. I think there was also a question about what do we do if the United States ends up sending a delegation in the middle of this process, or starts making phone calls. Well, I mean, I have no evidence to suggest that that's happening. I think that the U.S. has made its views on climate change and on this process very clear. As I think I've said in another context, they may be clear, but they're so unfounded by any scientific evidence or economic realities, that I don't think that they're very persuasive on their face. And so we hope that all the information and all the political dynamic that's happening in this process will maintain the momentum regardless of any intervention that the U.S. might make, either in person or on the phone. See, I think the sound broke down more when you were speaking, but I think it had to do more about finance and particular 9.1 and how the EU might be responding. And the trade measure. So yes, I did indicate that the EU has signaled that we're prepared to talk about all of these issues that are related to the agenda item proposals. In both circumstances, when we indicate that we're prepared to talk about them, we indicate that we're prepared to talk about them only in a way that doesn't prejudice the outcomes. So taking 9.1, 9.1 is a very important provision in the Paris Agreement, but it was negotiated alongside the other provisions within the Paris Agreement that relate to finance, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, 9.5, which in context make it clear that the amount of money provided by developed countries is insufficient to implement the Paris Agreement. It needs to be there alongside the role of other contributors coming in to provide resources, and incredibly importantly, in catalyzing flows through the process of mobilization from other sources as well. So we are prepared to talk about 9.1, but in the context of Article 9 as a whole. If our partners need specific reassurances on the continued importance of 9.1, we can provide them in that context. We also can provide them in the context of the goal that we just completed in Baku, the NCQG, where we set new and ambitious targets. But as you'll recall from Baku, those new ambitious targets also include a call for more contributors to join in that effort. That call becomes all the more important since Baku, because we know that one of the larger contributors to this process, the US, has essentially shut down all development flows from the US budgets, and no other party, including the EU, can make up for that gap. And so that challenge also has to be taken into account in these conversations about how we delivered on 9.1 in the context of the NCQG and Article 9 as a whole. On trade and climate, again, we're prepared to talk about it, but not framed in prejudicial terms in the way in which the original agenda proposal describes it. What do we mean by that? We mean that we can have a conversation about the fact that trade is an essential enabler of the transition away from fossil fuels. We've all experienced that. No single country has all the solutions, whether they're technological or they're financial or otherwise, and it's only through open markets that we can make sure that the technology necessary for the transition is getting where it needs to get. However, we have also seen within the EU and many other jurisdictions around the world that in order to engage in this process of decarbonization, you also have to make sure that an open market isn't driving the deindustrialization of your own economy. You have to make sure, in other words, that the terms of trade around clean tech and clean energy are free, but also fair. And that means that many jurisdictions around the world are developing standards for the trade in these products that are developed from a domestic perspective and are applied at the border, and as a result of which we have many standards emerging around the world that are different in their character. That then raises a challenge, and we recognize that this challenge exists, that this response to climate change, this response to trying to ensure that the transition within your country is just, does produce friction in the trading system, and we need to address those frictions. We are happy to have conversations around those frictions and how to address them in this process, and we've said that on a number of occasions, and we've agreed to agenda items under which we can have those conversations if framed in this non-prejudicial manner. For those of you who know the details of this process, that's primarily the Response Measures Forum, where we have an activity that's dedicated to these issues, but also as a result of decisions that we took in June, we're willing to look at this through the lens of just transition as well under the Just Transition Work Program. What we aren't prepared to do is to create some kind of proxy dispute settlement system in our process. If you want to have an argument about whether or not a particular country's measure is consistent with their international legal obligations, the only dispute settlement system that we all have, as parties have agreed to, is not in our process, it's in the World Trade Organization. And we're very confident that we will be understood, that it's in the interest of no government to try to create some kind of dispute settlement process here, because there are many other concerns that we have about the trade measures, the level of ambition, et cetera, of other countries' policies that can be discussed somewhat in the abstract and in political terms in this process, but can't be dealt with in a kind of a dispute settlement way. So I hope that's responsive to that question, but I want to turn to Maria if there's anything that she wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Jake. Yeah, just maybe to supplement on the response plan, and I think, I mean, besides recognizing the gaps and also pointing to where we can enhance our implementation of the NDCs, I think, and I think Jake also mentioned in the beginning, this recognition of the progress made. I mean, we are here 10 years after Paris. We have developed NDCs, and there's been quite a substantial change in the NDCs we've seen from the first round of NDCs to the latest round submitted. There's a lot of, they've become more substantial, and there's a lot of information on what parties are doing as regards implementing these NDCs and implementing policies that get us in the right direction. We have reports that summarize this, and we really think that there's some information in here that is worth reflecting on in this moment in time. And I think the same goes for our reporting system, quite an elaborate reporting system on what we're doing, and I think that's really worth also emphasizing in a response plan and in an outcome from this COP.
Okay, we still have 5 minutes. So maybe take one from this side of the room, on the front row here, and then we can come over to the other side. A couple of questions over there as well.
Hello, is that okay? Yeah. Josh Gabatis from Carbon Brief. So you were just talking about providing assurances to developing countries on Article 9.1. The climate finance pledges of most major donors expire this year. Do you think it would have made a difference coming into the negotiations, particularly around 9.1, if major donors like Germany, France, had come forward with new pledges for the NCQG period prior to the COP? Thanks.
And maybe we can take one from over here. 2, 3 questions on this side as well.
Thanks. Sebastian Rodriguez from Capital News. We were wanting to hear a bit more on the EU position on finance regulation and whether it would be in the EU priorities to discuss any finance well at this COP.
Catch that. And then maybe last one here.
Thank you. Lucas Knigge for Table Briefings. On the agenda, I don't know what I can do to avoid this. The fact that the agenda items, the disputed ones, are now the ones that get the most attention, and actually the ones who submitted them might be rewarded with a cover decision. Do you think that makes a precedent for other COPs, that if you want something to be high on the political agenda, then just throw it in there and force the presidency to come up with a cover decision to deal with those items? Thank you.
Okay, I think we don't have time for any more, so Jake, you can take those ones.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and then you can supplement. There were a few questions on finance, and I think on Finance for adaptation, I mean, there is a recognition also in the NCQG and the need to do more to enhance finance for adaptation. That's also an important priority for the EU. And I think there are a lot of initiatives in the NCQG that we need to look at and start implementing. And I think, I mean, the NCQG was just agreed last year, and I think there's a lot of work to do on making progress on that. On the precedent of bundling, I mean, that's of course a question. I think the issue here, and it was an agreement among parties on how to handle it. There were substantial asks on these agenda items, and I think this was how we could agree to take it forward. So I don't think I'm ready to speculate on whether it sets a precedent for future COPs, but I think, I mean, there were substantial asks here that they're met in this way. I didn't completely catch the first question on 9.1, so maybe.
That was the one I was hoping that you would address. The question was, as I understand it, that in the past, a number of EU member states have made specific finance pledges to particular funds, like the Adaptation Fund, et cetera, some of which have expired. And the question was, do they could it have helped the politics had they renewed them? I suppose at this COP. I mean, I think that's a question you need to put to the individual member states. I can't, sitting here, know whether it's in every case true, or whether some intend to make additional pledges at this meeting. I know that many member states are under a lot of fiscal pressure at the moment, and so in the near term may not be able to be as generous as they've been in the past. But I also know that the latest finance figures from the EU are actually an increase over the previous year. So there's a lot of momentum that's already built into our system that allows us to continue to provide our fair share, even in circumstances where it may be more challenging for us to do that from a fiscal perspective. So that's only a partial answer, but we know that, as Maria was saying, that there is a call for this COP to send a stronger signal about not just 9.1, but within 9.1, how we are reassuring countries that the adaptation finance will continue to grow, as we committed to doing in the context of the NCQG. And we're preparing for that aspect of the negotiations, and we'll see where they land this week.
Okay, thank you, Jake. I think we are out of time for today. Thank you all for coming. A reminder that there will be more EU press conferences coming up in the second week with Commissioner Hoekstra and Minister Aga from Denmark. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much for coming, and look forward to seeing you next week.